right, excellent. Just a second here. I'll move some stuff around. All right, perfect. So hello, everyone. Like Jody mentioned, I'm Johanna Ostrich. Welcome to a very special quarantine edition of NoVA UX. My topic today is the business side of starting a freelance business. Before I really dive in, here we are. Before I dive in, I do want to give a few socially distanced high fives around. First of all, thank you so much for the organizers, to Jody and Will and Jim and Alex. This is one of my favorite meetups. Honestly, I really always love this group, and I'm excited to be presenting. And I know that they put a lot of extra effort into making this particular one happen virtually. So I really appreciate all that they do. Also, shout out to everyone who's here. I know that probably many of y'all are very close to your TVs right now and could be watching Netflix. So thank you instead for tuning in to a talk about freelancing. So let's go ahead and dive in. So I want to start off by telling a quick story. So last June, I quit my job without another job. I just did it. And this is, I'm a pretty risk averse person. So this was sort of a big move for me. It's not something I think a few years ago I would have thought that I wanted to do. But at the time, it just seemed like a good idea. I was pretty excited about trying out freelance. And I spent a couple weeks getting organized. I then took 6 weeks of vacation and just traveled, which obviously would not be a good thing to do right now. But last year it was really great. And I really enjoyed taking time off. And I tried not to worry too much about the fact that I had nothing lined up when I got back. So then I really got started freelancing in August. So it's been right about 7 months that I've been freelancing. And it's been going really well so far. Much better, honestly, than I expected. I have been busy. I've been learning a lot. It's been challenging, but it's felt pretty doable. None of it has been too daunting, even though when I kind of look at all the things that I've had to learn, it felt like a long list, but doing it kind of over time, it's been pretty good. I think that my favorite part so far has been the flexibility, particularly getting to sort of shape how I want to spend my time. So like Jody mentioned, I've been doing a lot more teaching this year, which I really enjoy a lot, and I hadn't had as much time for in the last year or so. Also sort of figuring out what kind of projects I want to work on. It's been a lot of fun. I've really been enjoying that part of it a lot. I think the most challenging part so far has been just that so much of it is new, right? Pretty much everything I'm doing, some part of it is new. So the design part I know, but maybe I'm working with a new client, or I'm working with a new freelancer who's really awesome and I want to make a really good first impression. Or I'm learning how to make a contract while I'm doing a contract for the first time. So it's just been kind of this like constant stream of new things, which again has been really fun, but definitely a lot of work. So when I tell people that I'm doing this, right, I pretty much get the same two reactions very often together. The first is, wow, you are so brave, which is really nice and just like a little disconcerting, to be honest. You know, it worries me a little bit, but really, really very nice. And the other question, which usually comes right after it, is how does all of that work, right? Like, what were the logistics? Did you form an LLC? Is anyone hiring you? How are you getting contracts? Like, a lot of people have questions about the logistics of running your own business. And to be honest, these are the same reactions that I had before I started doing it. And I think that the reason for this is really that designers are not trained in business stuff, right? It's not something that's typically in our curriculum. And even if it's something that maybe you pick up a little bit along the way, it's not usually something you see other designers doing. So it doesn't exactly feel like something that designers are supposed to be able to do. It feels like a different skill set. Right. And I think we get this idea of like, it's just like this massive craziness that we're going to go into. And I think this is honestly, if you're doing it full time for sure, but even if you're thinking about freelance as a side gig, it just feels like this really unknown area. So for me, the way I've kind of been approaching this is honestly as a UX problem. And that's because I'm a UX designer. So that's just the way that I sort of think about things. You know, I do this all the time for my clients, right? Researching, building something, measuring, repeating. So I sort of have this idea that I can do this for a freelance business and kind of just see how it goes, kind of dive in and then learn as I go and kind of iteratively get better and better. So I'm just trying it out. I'm sort of thinking of this as like an MVP and trying to decide if this is going to be viable. And by viable, I mean, like, do I like it? Am I any good at it? Can I support myself? And I think this is all sort of part of the process. Like, it's possible I'll decide it's not viable and I'll try to get a full-time job, you know, at some point. And just kind of, I'm trying really hard to be very chill about it and not worry too much and just kind of trust the process. So anyway, this evening I wanted to share a little bit with y'all about what I've been learning over the last year, and what it's been like for me. If for people who are interested in trying this out, I think that there's a lot of information to find. A lot of this information I've kind of had to do research in all different places. So I think trying to put it all together in one quick deck hopefully will be helpful for people if you're interested in going into this. So for my agenda, I want to talk a little bit about setting up a business, talking about investing in your business, getting work, and then learning from others. Before I get started, a few little notes. The first one is I am not a lawyer and I'm not an accountant. So I'm not an expert at all in these things. This is just stuff I've been learning. So, take this as you will. Also a little bit about me, just to give you a sense, kind of give you some context. So I am a UX and visual designer, and I have about 10 years of experience in design, and all of that has been in DC. So I do have a network of people that I know, which has been really helpful. I don't think you have to have that in order to do well, but I think it definitely helps. I have also done freelance before, so this is the first time I'm doing it full time, but I've definitely kind of been playing around with it as a side hustle on and off since I've been in design. More when I first started, because honestly, I could stay up later when I was younger, but it's something I have done before, but not in like a balanced and healthy way. And I honestly had not done a lot of these important logistical things that I probably should have done. So this year has definitely been a learning experience for me so far. The last thing I wanted to mention, I mentioned that I've been doing a lot of research, and a lot of it has been I've been talking to other freelancers, and I've been reading a lot of stuff that freelancers or owners of agencies have been doing. I probably have missed a few people, but I wanted to give throw up a bunch of people who've been really helpful for me, who know a lot more than me and are super smart, and say that I really appreciate all the stuff that I've learned from them. I'm going to try to call out particular pieces of advice different people have told me, but I'm sure that I will have forgotten some things. So I want to at least have one spot where I have them all listed and give them a shout out. All right, so the first point, setting up a business. And this is really all the boring paperwork that was kind of a pain to figure out everything that I needed, but it wasn't really that much trouble once I actually did it. So the first thing that you want to do when you're setting up your business is you want to separate business you and personal you. And this is really about making sure that if anything goes wrong in your business, personal you is not going to be responsible for it. And so this is pretty important to do. And like I said, it wasn't actually that hard when I finally got around to doing it. So the first thing is you want to form an LLC, which is a limited liability company. It's a business structure that puts a legal wall of separation between the business assets and the owner's personal assets. And LLCs are not personally responsible for their company's debts or liabilities. So if you get sued, if you go bankrupt, you personally won't have to worry about any of your company's debts. So this is something that's pretty important to do. The other thing about this I think is useful to know is that if you have like a sole proprietor LLC like I do, you don't have to file a separate tax return for your LLC. You can put your profits and losses from your business on your own personal tax return, and that tax return like gets a little bit longer, but it's not a whole bunch of extra tax work. So that was good to know. And this is called a pass-through. When you're filling out your LLC paperwork, there's a few different options, and this is the one that I did, but I was a little confused about that terminology at first. So the way that you actually go about forming an LLC is you're going to file articles of organization. And this is something that you can do through your state, or if you live in DC, through the district. And so the process depends a little bit on where you live. So I live in Virginia, so I went to the State Corporation Commission website and filed. This website is very friendly looking on the homepage, and as soon as you click a few links in, it gets a little confusing. But what you're looking for is the paperwork for filing articles of organization. And this was pretty painless. It took a couple of days to process. It was $100, and then I'll need to renew it for $50 every year. So it wasn't real expensive. It's a little bit more in DC. It's $220 to file, and then every other year you have to pay $300. And in Maryland, it's $100 to file and then $300 a year to renew. I'm not really sure why it's more expensive to renew than to file, but that's how it's set up in Maryland. So if you live in Virginia, that's a good deal. It's definitely the cheapest in the area. So the next thing that you're going to want to do is get some business licenses. And this can depend on where you live, is particularly by county. So I live in Arlington County. So the things that I needed were a business license and a home occupancy permit. The reason that I knew that I needed these things is because a couple of freelance friends of mine, Lisa Kneff and Jenna Persico, told me I needed them, and I had completely missed that I was supposed to have them. So I appreciated that they let me know. I had not found any paperwork saying I needed that. So I actually went down to the courthouse, and someone was able to help me figure out what I needed, compensated, but you can also do this stuff online. And it was $35, including the late fee, because I was a few months late. So this was really cheap. I thought it might be a lot more expensive, so I was pleased it wasn't more. It's a little bit more expensive and I think more complicated in DC. An occupancy permit starts at $73, and then the basic business license is $200 to $500 every 2 years, depending on what kind of business you have, and a few different specifications with it. The last thing you're going to want to think about legally is an employer identification number, or an EIN. This identifies your business for tax purposes. It's basically like a social security number for your business. You don't actually have to have one to have a business, but there's a lot of things you're going to need it for, like if you're going to be opening a bank account, if you're going to be applying for certain licenses, or if you're going to pay anyone. So in general, it's just a good idea to get it while you're doing all your other paperwork, so that you'll have it when you need it. This is not through your state. This is actually through the IRS. So you can go to the IRS website and do this. And this took me like 10 minutes, and I got it right away. There was no processing, and it's free to do. So it was a pretty straightforward process. So other than legally, it's also helpful to separate your money physically, your business money, and also your personal money. So the way I did this, and this was some advice from my friend John Wilcox, who's an awesome freelance illustrator, is I set up 2 different business bank accounts, one for my regular business operations and then one for taxes, right? So usually when you're working with clients, they're not going to be taking money out of your paycheck for you. So you need to think about that on your own. So all my money comes into the business operations account, and then before I pay myself, I'll put money aside for taxes. And this has been working out really well. I also did this through my personal bank. So it's really easy for me to transfer between my personal account and my business account. These are free, by the way. I thought maybe you'd have to pay for a business account, but it was free to have. The other thing that I did is I got a business credit card, which makes it much easier for me to keep track of my business expenses. So whenever I buy something for the business, I put it on the business credit card, and then I have a running list, which I'll talk about more in a minute. The other thing that's nice about a credit card is I just felt like such a badass getting my own business credit card. Like, it made me feel really legit, and not like I was unemployed, like I was self-employed when I got a business credit card. So that was very exciting. And I also got that through the same bank that I have all my other accounts through, which they're all connected. So it made it pretty nice. All right, so next I want to talk a little bit about taxes, which is not really my favorite topic, but I think a useful one to talk about. One of the things that's nice about having your own business is there's lots of tax breaks that you can get for being a small business, and a lot of it has to do with your business expenses. So you can take those directly off of your taxable income. So, like, for example, if I have, say, like $1,000, if I made $1,000 and I had $200 of business expenses, then I would only have $800 of taxable income. So it really can make a big difference in your taxes overall. So it's a huge benefit to be paying attention to your business expenses and have it all documented. I actually kind of over-documented a little bit. I wasn't quite sure when I needed, and it turned out that I couldn't actually use all those things. But I think it's much better to over-document than under-document, and then be scrambling for all of those receipts, months later. So I wanted to walk through some of the things that you can document for your business expenses. So the first one is a home office. So this is something that's pretty specific. If you have to have certain qualifications. So this would be if you have a dedicated space in your home that is its own room, where you're only using it for a home office. And I think it has to be a certain square footage, and there's some other things, but there's pretty specific guidelines what will count as a home office. But if you do have this, you can take this benefit. My understanding is that you'll have a much better chance of getting audited if you claim a home office. So you really only want to do it if you actually qualify. Also, internet and phone. If you are working from home, you can include part of your internet and phone bill as a business expense. If instead you're renting an office somewhere else, that rent will also count. Business meals, 50% of the money you spend on, like, lunches with clients or networking coffees, any of those things will work as well. Any traveling will work. So if you're going to meet with a client somewhere, this doesn't count for commuting. So, like, if I'm going from my home to my office, that doesn't count. But if you're going between the office and a client meeting, that does count. And I got a smart trip card that I only use for my business expenses, and that sort of makes it easy for me to track when I'm taking public transportation, particularly for a business meeting. Advertising as well. So if you're doing business cards, or if you have a website, and you're hosting, any of those costs will all count. Health insurance premiums, which can be pretty expensive. I'll talk a little bit more about these later. If you, under certain circumstances, you can also count them. So the deal with these is that only if you're paying for them yourself and you're not eligible for any other plan. So like you're not eligible for COBRA with your old employer, you're not eligible under your spouse's plan. In that case, you can count your health insurance premiums, which is great because those are expensive. Also, business insurance, if you're getting any business insurance, which I'll talk again more about in a minute, that can also count. Any retirement plan contributions, like to an IRA or a solo 401k, will count. Any office supplies, computers, monitors, cables, pens, printing paper, any of that stuff counts. So those in particular, it's really good to keep the receipts because you might have a number of them. Any professional organizations, if you belong to something like AIGA, that'll count. And also any kind of educational materials. So if you are doing any kind of training online, if you're getting books or magazines, any of that stuff can be a business expense. So there's really quite a bit that you can count, which is awesome. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is insurance, right? Which is kind of a big one. This is one, like I mentioned before, can get kind of expensive when you're paying for it on your own. This is obviously much better than it used to be with the exchanges and healthcare.gov, but it definitely was something I knew that I was going to really want to get insurance, and I was a little worried about how expensive it would be, and so I did some research on it before I decided to freelance. So a couple kinds of insurance. So the first one is business insurance. So there's some different ones, but the general liability insurance is a pretty common one, and this is coverage that will protect you from a variety of claims if you get sued. Obviously, you don't want to get sued, but if that does happen, it's nice to know that you have some coverage for it. The research I've done with these, $350 to $500 a year is roughly what they cost, depending on what's covered. And then the other one, of course, is health insurance. For me, I knew that I wanted to get both medical and dental insurance, that was pretty important because I need to get my teeth cleaned. And so when I was looking at prices, I was looking at pretty much the cheapest plan that I could get that would have both of those benefits. If you're a sole freelancer like me, you're typically going to be getting insurance for individuals and families, not for a small business. A small business is usually if you have at least one employee. So you're probably going to be looking at the individual plans. And the cost can obviously vary a lot based on a variety of factors like your age, your location, even year to year. Like my premiums can change, depending on the year, and it can go up and down. I don't really know. So it's a little hard to give like an exact amount for this, but I wanted to go ahead and show kind of from the research I did how much it would cost for me in the different areas around here. So I'm 36, I'm a non-smoker. So in Virginia, where I live, it's $475 a month for the cheapest plan that had both medical and dental, which is so much money. It really hurts. It's cheaper in DC and Maryland. DC is $350 and Maryland is $280. So it's way, way cheaper to live in these other places. So Virginia is a lot better for business expenses in general, like with your licensing, but it's definitely more expensive for healthcare, which is a bummer. All right, so we've made it through the paperwork. Congratulations to us. Have a quick palate cleanser, wash your hands, and move on to the next topic, which is investing in your business and how much it all costs. So I think for me, I've really been trying to find a balance between being thrifty and trying not to just spend all my money, but also making sure that I'm spending enough money that I'm actually like a real business supporting myself, right? That I'm actually paying for the software I need and I'm setting myself up for success. One thing that's nice with design is you don't really need a lot of stuff, right? I mean, you need a computer, you need some software, but you don't need to invest in a lot of equipment, which is really nice. So this is not an exhaustive list, but I did want to put together some kind of a list of some of the things that I've been spending money on and about how much it's all cost. So the first group are initial expenses. So these are things that I had like a one-off purchase of that hopefully will last me for a while. And depending on what you already have, you may not need all of these. So for me, I got a new computer. So my old personal computer was about 10 years old. Still runs. I'm very proud of it, but obviously I was going to need to get a new computer. So I got a MacBook Pro, like the more expensive one with the Apple insurance, and it cost me $3,100, which was the first thing I put on my sweet business credit card, and it really hurt. It was a lot of money, but it's really nice. The computer's great. I also got some things to go along with it, like a computer stand, cables, a keyboard, computer cover, and a monitor. So the grand total for that was $3,740. Now, obviously, the MacBook Pro was the most painful thing to purchase, but the thing that actually like gave me the most trouble figuring out what I needed was the monitor. So I actually wanted to mention what it was that I got. So what I learned after ordering several different monitors and returning them was that my new computer had a really nice screen, much better than my previous screens, and it needed a really good monitor to go with it so that the resolution didn't look terrible. Like it had to have a much higher quality monitor. So I finally just went to Best Buy with my computer and a bunch of cables that I had just bought, and I plugged my computer into all of the monitors until I found one that worked. So the one that I got was this one. It's an LG. So Best Buy, several people at Best Buy and also at the Apple Store told me that LGs make the best monitors right now, which I was surprised about. I don't think I've ever owned an LG monitor before, but they all said it was the best. So that's what I went with. And I also got a 4K. So the 4K is the resolution number that makes it much better. So if you're in the need for a monitor, I would recommend getting this one. Also of note, it works much better when you plug it in with a display port than with an HDMI cable. The display port is better for high resolution images. So if anyone is in need, I would definitely recommend getting this one. It'll save you a lot of trouble and shipping expenses. All right, the next one is recurring expenses. So these are going to be things that I'm going to be continually paying for, right, as I go along. So the first one is design software. This one was pretty straightforward for me because this is stuff that I know what I need, and also a lot of it I already had my own personal version of. So it was pretty easy for me to decide what I needed to get. So for the Creative Cloud, $636 a year. Sketch is $69 a year for upgrades. InVision 300. Figma, I'm still using the free version and it's been working great, so I haven't upgraded yet. And then for file management, I've been using Dropbox, and it just went up to $120 a year. I think it was $100 before, so it's a little more expensive, but so that's what I've been getting for design stuff, which is so far $1,125. And there's my total as well. Also been getting some business software. This is something that I didn't have to figure out the business software at my last job. So I've been doing a little more research for this, right? And I've been asking a lot of freelancers what they've been using. So I'll give a quick rundown. So for the first one, my favorite thing I've been spending money on is I spend $6 a month for a Gmail business account. My business email comes through my hosting provider, and the interface is really bad for the email. So for $6 a month, I get it all to come through Gmail, and it's so nice, and I love it. For project management, I've been using Asana so far. In the past, at my old job, I had used Basecamp or Teamwork, and those definitely are a little more robust, but Asana works pretty well. A lot of the freelancers that I know use it, and so far I've just been using the free version, and it's been pretty nice. For time tracking, Harvest is pretty popular. It's $144 a year. For accounting, a lot of people use FreshBooks, which is $300 a year. They also do have some time tracking in there, so you may not necessarily need to get both. And then also Wave is another accounting one that a lot of people like to use, and that one you can get a free account that's pretty nice. All right, and the last main grouping is some additional expenses. Business cards, maybe like $100 a year. I'm not really sure I'm going to use them all, but something like that. Website hosting is about $100 a year, and then I pay $150 also for an AIG membership. So grand total, something like recurring is close to $2,000, and then for my first year, it's close to $6,000 that I've invested in my business. So definitely a decent chunk of change, but it could be a lot worse. So it wasn't too bad. The last thing that I wanted to mention is if you are interested in getting office space, there's a lot of different options in the area. There's actually a lot of co-working spaces. I hadn't really realized there were so many. They seem to be roughly the same price. I use an example, WeWork, since they have a lot of locations. The locations, depending on the location, the price is a little bit different, but the pricing is roughly for a hot desk, which is where you don't have your own dedicated space, but you can just use the public area, which obviously is not good for now. It's about $4,800 a year. Dedicated desks about $6,000 a year, and then a private office starts at about $12,000. I think that the cheapest co-working space that I found was the Cove, and that is going to be $2,750 a year. So if you're interested in getting an office space, there's definitely some good options in the area. All right, moving on. So the next section, now that we've been talking a lot about spending all your money, I want to talk a little bit about getting work, and then what you should do once you've actually gotten the work. I think it's probably fair to say that this is the most anxiety producing part of being a freelancer, right? Like, will anyone hire me? Can I get new work? And it's definitely something that I was pretty nervous about getting started. And so I don't have a ton of perspective on this, but I could definitely share with y'all sort of what my experience has been so far, and also some advice I've gotten from people who have a lot more experience than I do. All right. So first question, the big question, right, is how do I get work, right? Like how is anyone going to hire me? Can I actually do this and support myself? So I asked a lot of freelancers and agency owners about this, and pretty much they all said the same thing, which is that almost all their work comes from word of mouth. That they had tried some advertising, maybe they've done some cold proposals before where, if a company puts out an open RFP or a request for proposals, that they will, they might submit, a proposal for it. But that for the most part, it's all word of mouth. It's, old coworkers or a friend of a friend or old clients who then recommend them to somebody else. I was a little skeptical that this would actually happen for me. This seemed like a really wonderful scenario that maybe happened for better people. But actually, like, that's been my experience too. So I posted on Twitter and LinkedIn that I was freelancing, and that's it. And then I've been connecting with some freelancers, and I'll have some links later about some really nice freelance communities. But I haven't really been actively seeking new work other than that. I've just sort of been getting work has come in. Old coworkers have reached out. I've been doing some work with other freelancers, and this is of course where having a network already has been helpful. But I've been busy the whole time. I mean, actually a little too busy in certain situations, which has been awesome. And I've been working on some cool projects. So it's really been, like I said, I've been surprised at how well it's going. I was somewhat skeptical. Mike Montero, who is my very favorite designer to quote, in his awesome book, Design as a Job, which I would definitely recommend if you're interested in opening an agency or going into freelance, he says, everything you deliver on a current project and every interaction you have with a current client is business development. All successful jobs lead to more jobs, and you are never not trying to line up your next job. And he talks a lot in the book about how he kind of hates, worrying about getting his next job. And he really, like, the idea of business development really stresses him out. And this is just sort of part of being in freelance is a little bit of an unknown, and you're constantly working on this, but that usually the work that you're doing is the most valuable business development that you can be doing. So if you don't really know anybody yet, and you're just getting started, a few other places that I recommend connecting. So the first one, you could definitely look at some job boards, if you're looking for RFPs. Design Gigs for Good is the one that I've mainly been looking at. They have a lot of nonprofits will post on there, and there's some cool stuff on there. So I definitely recommend checking it out. Also staffing agencies, there's some really good ones in the area, Creative Circle, Creative Group, Cella, which used to be the Boss Group. And they're they have a lot of they have a lot of different positions coming out. They're usually not like 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week. It usually is going to be like, I need someone full time for 2 months. So it's not necessarily something that would work really well if you have a full-time job, but if you're actively looking for new opportunities, I would definitely recommend checking those out. And the last one is networking. NoVA UX is a great group, obviously. I really like Refresh as well. Even just talking to friends. I've sort of just told everyone I know that I'm freelancing, and it's been surprising some of the friends who know someone who needs a website that is getting a connection. So it's definitely something that I've been surprised that has worked, pretty well, just kind of talking, that you're talking to people about being available. All right, so if you are going to be pitching work for something, right, for an RFP, or if you have someone who's reached out to you, usually you're going to be writing some kind of a proposal, which is basically a document summarizing what it would be like working with you on the project. So typically, hopefully, you'll actually, even if you get an RFP describing the project, hopefully you'll also be able to talk to that person, ask some questions, and really get a good sense of what it is that they're looking for, and then basically put together a document saying how you would approach the project, how much you think it would cost, what the steps would be, that kind of thing. And a proposal can be really different depending on the client. My understanding is that for some government contracts, they can literally be hundreds of pages. I've never done one of those, but most of the ones that I've worked on, if they're a cold RFP, maybe in the 10 to 15 page range. And if it's someone that I've already been talking to, I've been trying to do like a 1 or 2 page proposal. I sort of have this theory that I'm UX testing, that I don't want to spend a lot of time writing a proposal and they don't want to spend a lot of time reading a proposal. And if I can get it to them sooner, that's probably going to be more valuable. So I'm testing it out. We'll see how it goes. So as a quick kind of a little template for y'all, if you're interested in doing these, what I've been trying to include in my proposals is, number one, a little bit of an intro, summarizing the client goals and what we've discussed, really giving them a sense that I understand what their problems are, what their priorities are, and that, I will be a good person to help them solve their problem. The second, which is of course the part that the client actually wants to see, is the scope of work. So this is going to be where you're laying out how you would approach the project, what steps you would take, deliverables, timelines, and then of course a cost. I often do it this way where I sort of break it down into a few different areas. I've seen people only give a cost for the whole thing. Also, depending on the project, you might give a few different options. It just kind of depends on what the project is. And then a couple other things I like to include. What's not covered is a really important section that I've started including after realizing that sometimes we were not aligned on expectations. So sometimes, like if a client is not a web design expert, they may not know that, you know, certain things that are going to be included. So things like content management or content migration or site hosting or site maintenance, like any of those things, you know, for you to say, hey, look, these are other things you're going to need. And then if they would like you to help with that, you can, but you're sort of clearly establishing what it is you will be doing and what it is their responsibility. And then the last section, a proposed team. This could just be me, or if I am going to work with some other freelancers, kind of putting together a little bio, talking about the team members and why they would be a great group for that particular project. So you spend a lot of work on your proposal now. So sometimes you're going to get the job and very often you won't. One of the things about doing this is you kind of just have to get used to the fact that you're going to get a lot of rejections and you shouldn't feel bad about it. One of the things that I find very helpful is to read really famous people or very successful people who are also get rejections all the time and kind of hearing what their process is like as well, because it makes me feel more like, oh, it's not just me. I shouldn't take it personal. So I do want to read a quote. This is from Kia Brown, who's a really awesome writer. And this is from the Strong Feelings podcast, which is my favorite podcast. I love it. I would definitely recommend checking it out. She says, so I think that you just have to look at rejections as stepping stones to either something greater, something different, or just a moment in time when you were not ready and they were not ready for you. We're all still getting rejections. We're all still getting humbled in that way, I think. So I really, this is really nice. I really love to hear this kind of thing. I mean, obviously I don't want her to get rejected, but it's nice to hear that other people are doing this too. And it's just not something that you should take personally. And I think this idea also that just because it didn't work out in this time doesn't mean that you should feel bad or be embarrassed, or even doesn't mean that you couldn't work together again at some point. It's a nice, it's a good attitude that I'm trying to adopt. So if you do get the job, however, congratulations, that's awesome. And you have a lot more work to do now, which is great. That's just what you wanted, right? So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is write a contract. This is, will clearly lay out the terms of engagement so that you and the client are on the same page. A lot of the problems that come in working relationships happen if the expectations aren't aligned, right? If what the client thinks is happening and what you think are happening are not the same thing. So writing a contract can really help make this very clear for everyone going into the project. It's also going to protect both parties if anything goes wrong, which again, you hope it's not going to go wrong, but you want to have that backup language in case it does. There's some different things you can include in a contract. At the very least, even if you're not writing a formal contract, like even if it's just an email form, you want to have a few different things in writing. This, by the way, I learned from Jim Webb, who's an awesome freelance developer in the area, after I did a really bad job of this when I was like on my 50th round with someone on a volunteer project. So I learned to do these things. So number one is make sure you include the scope of work. This includes the work that you're going to be doing and the number of revisions that you're going to be doing. If you later decide you want to do an extra couple of rounds, that's fine. But you want to clearly say, hey, look, this is the amount of work I'm doing. Number two is a timeline. So this is going to include the tasks that for you, when the client's going to get back to you, and then what the final deliverable date is. With a clear understanding that if the client takes longer to get back to you, that's totally fine, but it's going to shift the whole timeline back. And the last one, very important one, is payment. So how much you're going to get paid and when you're going to get paid. And this is, if you were working on like a larger project, it is very common to divide the payments into maybe 2 to 4 different payments and for you to get the first one before you get started. This is basically so that you are a retainer for your time and so that you're going to be able to eat while you're working on that project. So this is totally an industry standard. You should do this. You should get paid before you start working on a project. The other thing is that you are definitely welcome to charge a late fee for any late payments. You should have that language on there. If you later decide that you don't actually want to charge them a late fee because they're great and it's fine, it's okay, but it's good to have that language on there so you can fall back on it if you need it. Some other useful things that are good to include in a contract, intellectual property transfers on full payment, meaning that they don't get to own all of the stuff until they've paid you in full. Super useful. A termination fee or a kill fee, meaning that if the client cancels the project in the middle of the project, they still owe you for the work that's been done. And last, and this one is not, depending on the project, it may not make sense, but having some language about being allowed to display your work in a case study or an article or anything like that can be really useful. So if you're later trying to put together a portfolio, you don't have to go back and ask all your clients if it's okay to include it. You'll just have that from the beginning, knowing that it's okay to talk about or not okay to talk about, but you'll know in advance. You do not have to write a contract on your own, by the way. There's lots of great templates out there. Two that I really like. The first one, Contract Killer, which is from Stuff and Nonsense, which is Andy Clark. He's an awesome freelancer in the UK. And he has an open source contract that is particularly for web design and development. So if you're looking for that kind of language, it's really great. It's very plain language. He doesn't include a lot of legalese. And it's also very short, which I like a lot. And the other one, the AIGA, has a really good standard contract that you can use. All right. Next thing I want to talk about is pricing, which I've sort of mentioned and then skirted the issue a little bit because I think it's an important one to spend a little bit of time talking about. Pricing is hard for a variety of reasons. I think particularly because it's uncomfortable talking about money, like it's kind of icky. And also like it brings up a lot of feelings of like, well, do I really need this much money? Am I really worth it? Like, you know, it brings up some imposter syndrome, right? But it's a pretty important one to get comfortable with. So when you're getting started thinking about how much to charge, you really want to be thinking about two things. First of all, you need to get comfortable talking about money, which I'm going to be the first one to admit I'm not very good at, but I'm working on getting better at it. And the second one is you need to know your value and you need to stick to it and be really clear about how much you charge. So I want to talk a little bit more about each of these. So in this really excellent book, Pricing Design, Dan Mall says, the more comfortable you are talking about money, the more comfortable your client will be. It's your job to put them at ease through these questions. So treat this with the same straightforward attitude as you do team size and time frame. This takes practice. So why do you need to talk about money, right? Why is it important? So a few things. First of all, this sort of seems obvious, but like you need money to stay in business, right? Like you just can't run your own business if you aren't comfortable talking about money. So it's something you just kind of have to do out of necessity. Number two, it helps you have more productive conversations about the client's needs if you know all of their constraints, right? Sometimes clients will not really want to tell you their budget. They'll kind of want to have you give them a price first so they can get a better sense of how much you think it'll cost. But it can be really hard to give them a good solution or propose a solution if you don't know how much their budget is, right? If you give a solution that is way too expensive, it's going to feel really demoralizing. If it's really much too cheap, it might be that it really is not including all the things that they could have used that would have been great. So it really can help you to have more honest conversations with them if you have even like a vague idea of what their budget is. The last point, which is a little more like holistic, is that talking about money levels the playing field, especially for designers from marginalized groups. And this is about salary transparency, right? That is pretty common in our industry. I think we all know that some people are not paid as much as others for the same level of work. And it's a huge problem. And it's one that really will only get better when we talk about money, right? When we're able to talk about how much things cost. Someone who does a really good job of this is my friend Becca Gurney, who runs Design Choice in the area. And she is basically like as a design collaborative or a freelancer collaborative where she works with different freelancers on different projects depending on what they are. And she's a big advocate for salary transparency and advocating for making sure that people are getting paid a fair amount. And I've learned a lot about this from her, and it's really awesome. And it's something I definitely want to do a better job of going forward. All right, so if you have a client who is not wanting to tell you their budget, Dan Mall talks about what he calls the magic sticker shock question. He says you should ask, are you aiming to spend closer to $500,000, $50,000, or $5,000? And what he basically says is usually what happens is the person is so horrified by the 500,000 number that they will then be like, oh, no, 50,000, or oh, no, 5,000 is more like that. And he says it works pretty well. So I haven't used it too much yet, but it's something that I'm trying to bring into my conversations more because he's someone who knows a lot about this, and I am trying very hard to get better at it. All right, the next point I want to talk about is knowing what your value is, right? Determining your worth. When you're a freelancer, your time is different than if you're a full-time employee because number one, you're not going to be billing as much of your time, right? You're doing business development, you're doing all kinds of things. And the other one is that you're paying for more things on your own, like your own insurance. So you need to be taking this into account when you're coming up with your rates. So really you shouldn't be basing an old hourly salary or you shouldn't be taking your old hourly salary. That's really hard for me to say, and using that to determine your new salary, right? Like it's not really a one-to-one. So you need to think about that when you are coming up with what your rate will be. So how do you come up with what your rate should be? There's a few different things. First of all, do some research, figure out what the rates are in your area. I've talked to other freelancers who've been pretty open about sharing their rates with me, which has been really nice. Also a good resource, which I have a link to later on in the deck, is the very long titled Graphic Artists Guild Handbook, Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. And this book is very thick and has tables and tables of prices for different types of projects. And it's a little bit of a hefty read, but it's really a good thing to check out. The other thing is UX test your pricing. A lot of people will say that if clients are too quick to okay your estimates, that's usually a good indication that you're not charging enough. If you get a little bit of pushback, it's probably better. Mike Montero said this really well. He says, my friend Anil Dash once said that if you hand a client an estimate and slap them across the face and they complain about the slap, the estimate wasn't high enough. Which I think is great. I really like thinking about it that way. By the way, obviously don't actually slap your client in the face. We're in quarantine. Make sure that you are washing your hands and practicing good social distancing. I hope that is clear. Okay, so a few different pricing methods. So the first one, which I think a lot of people use, is hourly pricing, right? Where you set a certain base rate, and then depending on how many hours you work, you just charge that amount. This is a great place to start, and a lot of people do this. For me, I charge $100 an hour. I did some research in the area, and that seemed to be about right for my level of experience and the kind of work I'm doing. Also, I had a good amount of experience estimating the amount of hours different jobs would take in my old job, so I felt pretty comfortable kind of jumping into this right away. One of my friends, Sylvia Script, she has a really detailed price list for depending on the type of project, she'll charge different amounts. And this to me seems like a great idea. And honestly, I just haven't really had time to think about it too much. And so I've been using this very nice round number of 100, but it's something that I might try to do at some point. And one thing I would also say is if you're going to be, when you're estimating your hours, it's good to round up just a little bit because usually something unexpected is going to come up for like pretty much every project. And you want to make sure you're just giving yourself enough time that you can adequately address it instead of being really skimpy on hours. So definitely try to round up a little bit, particularly if you're new at estimating hours. So the thing about hourly pricing is that it works really well for a lot of things, but it can be challenging and kind of it can punish efficiency a little bit, like particularly as you get better and better, it won't necessarily be an advantage. So you could of course up your rate a little bit, but it still doesn't always scale well. A couple people who talk about this really well are Jessica Hish and Dan Mall. So I want to talk about both of their methods a little bit. So Jessica Hish, who's an awesome letterer, probably a lot of y'all know her, in The Dark Art of Pricing, which is an article on her website, she says, most designers take into account the hours they'll put into a project when coming up with a price. But the seasoned professionals use it as part of the way they quote a project and not as the only defining factor. And what she goes on to talk about in this article is really licensing and rights management, usage rights. And this is something that particularly works really well if you're going to be doing branding or logos or illustrations, something like that. That this is a very common practice with that kind of work is that you will charge an hourly rate, but you'll also charge for different kinds of usage rights. So for example, if you make an illustration that's going to be used for one issue of a magazine only in the print version, that's going to be very different than if you're giving them something, illustration that'll be used in print, in the web, and in a global advertising campaign in perpetuity, and that you should be charging different amounts for that. And in the article, she does a nice job of kind of walking through how you can go about thinking about that pricing. So if this is something that you do, I would definitely check that out. The next one from Dan Mall is what he calls value-based pricing. And he talks a lot about this in his book, Pricing Design. What he says is that, you really need to be thinking about how much value you're providing to the client and then charge based on that. So if you're going to be doing a project with a huge corporation that will make them $1 million, you should be charging more than if you're going to be working with a small nonprofit on the same size project. And what he says is that something like 10% of how much they're going to be making is often what you should be trying to charge. I haven't actually tried this out yet, but I think it's definitely something that I'll be thinking about for the future. It seems like a really good way of doing it, but definitely something that I'm mulling over. All right, the next thing I want to talk about, just for a few minutes, is managing projects. So one of the things that I knew I was going to hate about being in freelance was that working by myself, I'm doing all the jobs, right? So I'm the designer, I'm the CEO, I'm the janitor, and also the project manager, and also the accountant, right? Like I'm doing all the things. And obviously, I'm also going to do a lot of them kind of poorly. And I knew that I was not going to like working without a project manager. I've been really lucky that I've worked with some really great ones over the years. And so I've been trying to pick up on a lot of the great techniques that they use. So I wanted to share a few of the things that I've learned that I think have been helpful to keep projects organized when it's just me. So the first one, this is some advice that I heard from Jamie Newberry, who at an event apart a few years ago. She had this advice that sort of didn't strike me as particularly exciting at the time, but I feel like I think about it all the time. It's been really useful. So she said that you should be specific immediately in communications. So like, for example, if you're going to be sending an email where you're suggesting a meeting time or a meeting, you should provide all the details in that email. So location, some time options, anything else, like right in that one email. So the client could just email back, sure, that's great. And you've now had a 2 email communication instead of like a 10 email communication back and forth where you're slowly getting at all the details. And this is just really going to make things a little easier, and it's really going to be about you respecting that person's time. So this is, again, very, very actionable and very easy to do. And it has, I found it to be very useful. All right, the second one is you want to be summarizing conversations. So anytime you have a meeting with a client, you want to be providing them a recap of the meeting. Usually an email is fine, and particularly highlighting the main tasks for everyone. This is going to help keep everybody on the same page, and also you're having all this stuff in writing, so you know that your expectations are the same. It's easier if there's a problem later to go back to the writing. Number 3, be proactive and kind. Most clients have a lot of work on their plates. Like, that's often why they hired you, is because they're really swamped. And so helping to keep them organized is part of your job, right? Like, anything that helps you do your job better is part of your job. So if you don't want to get in a situation where they got behind on things and then you're really mad, it's much better if you can proactively be sending them reminders and having regular communication and keeping them organized and helping set them up for success. It's going to make the project go a lot smoother. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is designing your meetings. So if you are a freelance designer, you might find that you are organizing more meetings or running more meetings than you used to. And we've probably all been in meetings that really sucked, that just were completely useless. And then also some meetings, hopefully, that were very good. So if you are going to be leading a meeting, you want to make sure that you're really crafting your meeting with care so that it's actually useful, right? That it's not one of those terrible meetings. So 2 things that you should be thinking about. Number 1, what is the outcome that this meeting will enable? And number 2, how can you measure that outcome? And if you don't know the answer to that, you probably need to do a little more work, or maybe just cancel the meeting entirely. A really great resource, if you're wanting to learn more about this, is Meeting Design by Kevin Hoffman, who is a local designer and actually has come to some NoVA UX events. He's really nice. His book is awesome. It's all about how to go about approaching meetings like a design problem, and it's really great. I would totally recommend checking it out. One of my favorite sections, which I think is also a really actionable section, is about memory. He says, if people are the one ingredient that all meetings have in common, there is one design constraint they all bring: their capacity to remember the discussion. That capacity lives in the human brain. And he goes on to talk about that there are certain things you can do in meetings to help people remember better, which is, again, I definitely been in meetings where I didn't remember anything. And so I really was interested in this concept. So a few different things he suggests. So number 1, you should cap meetings at 90 minutes. Shorter is definitely better, but like, you really shouldn't be having meetings that are longer than 90 minutes unless you're going to be bringing in snacks, like nutritious snacks, and also having long breaks. What he says is that you really, you form stronger memories at under 90 minutes. This is, by the way, why if you've ever like binged a Netflix show, like the whole thing on one weekend, and then like a month later, you don't really remember what the show was about. This is why. So we're not really good at forming strong memories when we just sit there for hours and hours and hours. So cap the meeting a little shorter and people will remember it better. Number 2, you should take notes for everyone to see during the meeting. If you're in person, which obviously none of us are right now, having a whiteboard that someone can be taking notes on can be really helpful. Or if you're working like on Zoom, maybe even just pulling up a Google Doc that everyone has pulled up. And the idea with this is, first of all, you're bringing in another sense, right? It's not just auditory, but it's also your vision, right? Visual listening. It's going to help people remember things. And the other one is that having not notes for everything, but like the main points on the board will, again, have everyone seeing the same main points and help people be on the same page by the end of the meeting. The third one, which is sort of related, is if possible, it's really helpful to have physical items in a meeting. So things like Post-it notes, that people remember things better when they're using physical things as well. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is a little more like big picture mushy, but I think is really important, is thinking a little bit about business goals. This is honestly not something I've done like an amazing job of yet. I haven't like set and written everything down, but it's something I've been thinking a lot about. I think one of the things that is kind of exciting about having your own business is this like, ooh, I can decide what I want it to be. I'm my own boss, right? And I think it's really important that you're actively taking time to think about what kind of business do I want to be, right? Not just at the beginning, certainly at the beginning, but also kind of as you go. So I wanted to share with y'all a few of the questions that I've sort of been thinking about. The first one, which is pretty straightforward, is what kind of projects do I want to work on? And like what clients do I want to work with? For me, I really, in my old job, I work with a lot of nonprofits, I work on a lot, and also on a lot of websites. And I really enjoy doing that. Websites, working with people who are doing good stuff in the world. And so I'm trying to do that going forward. The next question, a pretty important one, what are my financial goals? How much do I need to support myself so I'm not going to go under? And how much do I need to like be doing well? For me, in a somewhat painful process, I went through like all of my expenses for the previous year, and came up with an amount that I was like, I think I need this much to not, lose money. And so that was kind of my initial somewhat conservative goal for the year, was like, can I just like not go into savings? And so far I'm on good track for that. I actually think I might do a little bit better, which is great. I've been very pleased to see that. So number 3, how do I define success? I think this could mean a lot of different things for different people. I think for me, I'm sort of the things I'm thinking about right now, and I imagine it'll change a little bit, is first of all, I really want to work with clients that I feel really good about what they're doing. Like I want to be excited about what I'm working on. And number 2, I really, even though I'm working by myself, I don't like working by myself. Like I like working with other people. So part of sort of trying out freelance for myself is seeing like, will I have opportunities to work with other freelancers? Like, is that a model that will work? Can I embed myself in other teams and be able to really like have a good collaborative relationship, even as a single person? So I'm kind of trying to figure that out. So like so far it's been going pretty well, but that's like a big goal for me. I don't think that I would feel successful if I weren't doing those things. And the last one, which is sort of, I think, an extension of that, is how do I define my no? I think that obviously there's a lot of value in being enthusiastic and positive and always trying to find a yes answer for everything. But I think that there's really an importance in like figuring out when your answer is no, right? And some of the designers that I really look up to are really good at this. So it's something I've been thinking a lot about. And I think this, there's a lot of areas where this could be, right? So thinking in terms of like tech ethics, like Brandon Dorn I think like a year and some change ago, did a really great talk about tech ethics at the NoVA meetup, right? Thinking about like, what are the things that I'm not comfortable working on? Or what are the kind of things that I'm not really interested in working on enough that I would not want to do it? Or even like, what are the things that if a client wants me to do it, even if it's not like ethically wrong, I just don't think it's a good idea. And I really think it's important to convince them not to do it, right? So again, this is something I'm sort of playing around with, but I think it's an important question to sort of continually be asking yourself and continually evaluating as you go on. All right, so the very last section, I wanted to share some resources and freelance communities that I've been finding really helpful. So Mike Montero says, getting good at doing what you love means having the confidence to recognize what you know, the humility to recognize what you don't, and the courage to extend our respect to those who make our faults more visible. I think I've been experiencing a lot of this year, of like all the things that I don't know, and I've been learning a lot from people who know a lot more than me. So I really want to share some resources. So most of these I've mentioned already. So the Strong Feelings podcast, this is run by Sarah Wachter-Betcher and Cattell Ledoux. The tagline is "It's show for feminists at work." They interview lots of really cool people doing all kinds of cool stuff at work. I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's actually one of the things that convinced me to try going out on my own. It was a really inspiring podcast, and I really like it a lot. Also, Jessica Hish, she has a lot of great resources on her site. She's really generous with providing insight on her experience being a freelancer, which she's been doing for a long time. I definitely check it out. Some of the other books, most of these I mentioned already. So Design as a Job, my very favorite book on freelancing. The Graphic Artists Guild Handbook, Pricing and Ethical Guidelines, a little bit of a mouthful. But again, this is a very hefty book with tons of data on pricing and things to think about when you're trying to come up with your pricing overall. Pricing Design by Dan Mall is really great. It's a really short read. And Meeting Design by Kevin Hoffman, which I totally recommend. It's a really interesting book and really like made me feel like I was doing a terrible job at meetings. Like I just learned so much from that book. The last two I haven't mentioned because I actually haven't read them yet, but they've been very highly recommended to me and they're on my list, so I want to go ahead and include them. The first one is The Freelancer's Bible by Sarah Horowitz. She started Freelancers Union, which is in New York. I've heard really good things about this book, and also Brutally Honest by Emily Ruth Cohen. This is a book about sort of taking your creative business to the next level. Like I said, I've heard really good things about them. All right. And the last thing, I wanted to mention some local freelance communities. So I've been really impressed by the freelance community in the area. People are really nice and really welcoming, and I've learned a lot. So the number one group that I've been working with is Freelance DC. They have a Slack channel and also a Facebook group, and it's really, like I said, really nice group. People post like job opportunities all the time, and people will ask questions. Particularly on the Slack channel, a lot of people will kind of ask questions about this various freelance thing. It's also a lot of good gifts happening on that channel. The other one is She Freelances, which is a freelance directory run by Becca Gurney, who does Design Choice. And it is a list of local freelancers in the area who are women or are non-binary people. And it is, so if you're looking for a freelancer to partner with, you can go on there, and there's lots of great people, and you can see more about them. Also, if you're interested in getting on that list, you can contact her and she can put you on the list. There are some criteria for getting on, but it's a really nice resource to find local creatives in the area. All right, so you made it. Thank you for sticking around with me for this whole thing. I hope that this was a useful overview of some of the things I've been learning in the past year, and also just kind of what it's been like for me sort of getting started with this. And I hope it helps some of y'all become your own badass bosses. So does anybody have any questions? I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen if I can. Wait a minute here. Ooh, come back.
Hey, Johanna, awesome presentation. Thank you. We got some questions that came through. There are some that are fast following, hot and heavy right now. Well, we'll start with the ones that I was able to capture, and certainly to those folks who are online are posting. If you don't hear your questions posted, we're going to have a little bit of open forum for you to be able to jump in and to ask Johanna questions directly. The first one comes from Nick Whitmore. Nick has a few, but I'll start with the time, and I'm going to go in chronological order in the times the questions came in. Nick asked, can you form an LLC in a state that you don't live in? And Nick, feel free to jump in if I'm not asking the questions correctly.
Yeah, so I live in Virginia, but if I didn't, and I thought Virginia's LLC costs and renewal rates were attractive, I guess that's the basis of my question. Or, you know, if I understand correctly, there are certain states where it may not necessarily apply to an LLC, but other forms of corporate entities, that there's some benefit to doing them in other states.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm definitely not going to be a total expert on this, but I think generally you do need to form an LLC where you live. However, I know there are some exceptions, particularly Delaware has a setup where you can, I think it's not so much for LLCs, but for corporations, you can form in Delaware, and then they have all these really great tax write-offs, or maybe you don't pay taxes at all. There's some kind of really great tax benefit from forming in Delaware. So apparently tons of companies do that. But I looked into it, and for just me, a sole proprietor, it didn't really make any sense to do it that way. But I think, again, I think it depends a little on the state, but generally it has to be where you're actually located.
Great. Next question from Chris Raymond. What's involved in qualifying a business credit card?
That's a great question. I went into the bank and I asked them about getting a business credit card, and I got one. And I don't actually know. I mean, they did most of the paperwork for me, so I actually don't know exactly what was involved. I mean, I had a new business, and it wasn't like I didn't have any kind of collateral already on my business. I didn't have a credit score for my business yet, and I was able to get one, but I'm not really sure exactly how it works.
And I can help answer that a little bit. Much of it, as you're starting out a business, it does tether back to your personal credit a lot, since you're starting out a business from scratch, just like you're taking out a loan for any business loan. It is tethered to your assets as well as your current credit worthiness. In the case for a credit card, it would be based on your personal credit, because you really don't have any credit history based on your business. So if you have good credit, you should be fine.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Next question, also from Chris. Would I be able to deduct as unreimbursed business expenses the cost for internet during the weeks that we are all working remote? And Chris, feel free to jump in if I'm asking that question correctly.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the right term for it, but like, I know in the past you could deduct work expenses that your employer wouldn't reimburse you for.
So you're talking about if you're self-employed, if you'd be able to.
No, I I'm not a freelance now. I have a full-time job, but we've all gone permanently remote for the foreseeable
Sure.
future. And so, obviously we all have to be on the internet, and I'm just wondering if and I know you're not a lawyer or an accountant,
Sure.
but maybe the group knows, like, can I deduct some percentage of the cost of my internet for this time period?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I don't think you could under like, what I'm talking about is like for self-employment taxes.
Yeah.
So I imagine it's different, but I suspect that I feel like this is such a moving target right now. I think it'll be interesting to see if they come out with any information about that.
Yeah.
I think it could, again, I'm not a tax accountant or anything, but I think it could be a little risky to trying to do that. A lot of folks may try to do some stuff.
There'll be no one working at the IRS in a few months anyway, so.
All right, next question from Anne. Really helpful stuff, Johanna, by the way. I see by your website that you teach at American University. That's a sweet thing. Especially now that they're gone to all teleteaching for the rest of the year. How would you land that? And how do you blend that into your overall tax expenses situation? Good question.
So you're asking how I got the job initially, and also how it works with my taxes?
And if you're still there, love to get you qualified, but it sounds like that's her question. Yes.
Yeah, so the way that I actually got this position is I knew someone who worked there, and and talking to random people, and she said, "Oh, actually, they're looking for someone. Would you be interested in talking to them?" And it totally hit me by surprise. I actually they had a last minute need for it, and I signed up about a week before the semester started. So this was last semester. So it kind of was like a very random thing. I teach at General Assembly as well, and I've taught there for years, so I did have teaching experience, which helped. But that was sort of like just like a random connection, which really, like I said, I just started freelancing and got something, come in, and it really gave me a nice ego boost and feeling like, oh, good, I'll have something to do this semester. In terms of taxes, so this is actually a situation where at American, even though I'm an adjunct, they did take taxes out of my my paycheck. So I had a W-2 and not a 1099. And I'm not really sure how they decided to do that, but for that particular one, the taxes were already taken out. So what I got was different. So, but I just included that in all of my different, all the money that I got for a year, I sort of listed out in my my self-employed business list. And then just the way it was set up, that counted as some of the taxes I'd already paid. Does that answer the question?
Hey, Ann, if you're still there, let us know. I'll go on to the next question. Ann, feel free to jump in. Nick Whitmore, if a client is offering equity as a form of compensation, what are some ways to structure a contract for this?
What are ways to structure the contract?
If a client is offering equity instead of good cash, whole card, earned cash.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is not something that I have encountered so far. So it's not something that I've actually researched very much. There's lots of good contracts online, a lot of templates that you can use. For something like that, I honestly probably would talk to a lawyer because I feel like that's out of the area that I know, and I would start feeling like I had no idea what I was talking about, to be honest. That's something that's like just complicated enough. I'd be like, no, I don't know what this is.
All right, next question from Amelia. Is knowing a budget of your client something you ask for upfront? Like, do you ask for a budget upfront with your client?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things Dan Mall talks about is when he talks about his initial conversation with clients, usually he'll send them a list of questions, and then he'll talk through it with them on the phone or a video chat or something like that. And he says he always talks about budget in that meeting, but I think he said about 3/4 of the way through. He's like, if you talk about it too soon, it makes you feel weird. If you talk about it too late, it felt like you were avoiding talking about it. So you want to talk about it, but like towards the end, but not the very end. But definitely like in that initial conversation with clients, it's good to bring up. It's something that if you get really far in the process and then realize that your budgets are not going to align, you've just wasted a lot of time. So it's a good thing to bring up right away. And you should definitely ask about it. I think that it can be tempting to just sort of try to hope the client will bring it up, but it's really something you should try to bring up on your own. And again, getting more comfortable talking about it, which is again something that I'm working on doing myself. It's not something that I love to do.
Cool. Anne asked another question. And by the way, Anne responded. You did answer her first question.
Oh, excellent.
Very well. So thank you for that. What do you do when clients do What do you do when clients slow-mos payments and or fails to pay?
That's a great question. I've definitely had some clients be a little slow to pay. Maybe like they were like 2 to 4 weeks late. And so I've just sent some follow-up emails. I know that I've spoken to people and also read, from different experiences where sometimes people will just not pay, right? And so you can sort of follow up a certain amount on your own. At some point, if it's enough money, it might be worth getting a lawyer involved. Though obviously, if it's not that much, it may be that it's not worth the lawyer expenses. But it's definitely something where you're at a little bit of a disadvantage, particularly if you're small and they're big. So it can be tough, which is again also why it's helpful to break the payment up into multiple amounts, so they're not paying you for the entire thing after the whole project is done. So you at least will know in advance, like they'll hopefully be paying you something, but if they stop, you will at least not have wasted the whole project.
Good point. Tom asks, how are you balancing doing the current work and finding the next project?
That's a great question. What I would say is, yeah, I mean, I have not been doing a lot of business development. I have been, I'll often be working on some projects and also talking to people at the same time. But it's just it's been kind of organic. Like I haven't structured my time really intentionally. I think I might at some point, but I feel, to be honest, it's all felt a little bit like a Tetris level that's been a little bit too advanced for me, and I'm just kind of like trying it out. So I haven't gotten as organized, I think, as I would like to. But it's been pretty organic, and I try to, if I'm really focused on a project for a while, like that's fine for a while, but I try to at least be doing a little bit of networking, a little bit of reaching out to people, so that I'm not, only thinking about that if I then find that I have nothing to do.
Great. Another question from Ann. Any thoughts about the California's new freelancer law, i.e. if other states adopt it?
I honestly, I do not know enough about this to have a useful opinion. I mean, I know that there is one, but I don't know that much about it. Does anybody else know more about it?
Hi, this is Ann. They basically are trying to force corporations to recognize a lot of their independent contractors as actual employees. Especially, for example, like, Uber, etc. But it's had unintended consequences insofar as it's causing the companies to just not use the freelancers because they don't want to add them as employees. And I know New York and I think Maryland are talking about adopting something similar. So it's something just to keep on one's radar, because it's had a major impact, unintended consequences impact in California. So I just bring it up for what it's worth. If you Google new California freelancer law, you'll see all the stuff about it. But thanks.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing.
All right, got another question for us from Serato. Question was, will the slides be available to us?
Yes, I will. I will probably tweet out, or the organizers will send out the information with the slides later on.
Very cool. Thank you. Link asked, more UX oriented, but do you tend to use themes, templates, or design everything, or do you design everything from scratch?
You're talking about like for website templates. Like, do I tend to go with templates? Usually I design things more or less from scratch. I mean, it depends a little bit on the project. Like I've made some Squarespace sites for people before if they really needed something very simple, didn't have a big budget. But typically I design things custom.
Nice. This question is from Godfrey. Do you have any advice for someone with a full-time job with the intention to gradually transition into freelance work?
Yeah. First of all, that's great. That's probably, I think, would have been a smarter thing to do than just quitting my job. But I think that is the benefit of that, of course, is that you can slowly build up your client base over time. It's a little bit less of a risk. I think that in that case, obviously you want to sort of be conscious about, how much time you want to take on with projects, right? Like I know I mentioned, like when I first was getting started in design, I would be doing freelance and I would just be staying up all night because I was young and I could, and I can't do that anymore. So for me now, before I was doing this, when I would do a freelance project, I really needed to be careful about, hey, look, this is the amount of time I think I can do now. You know, this is I would need to be careful about my timelines, like knowing that I can only work probably on the weekends. So I think a lot of it is just kind of being really intentional about your time. In terms of looking for projects, I think it's largely the same, you know, reaching out to other people. Often people are looking for smaller amounts of work, right? Not everybody wants a lot of work. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
That's great. Similar question. After the meeting, will you be able to send out the link for the recording? We'll take care of that with your permission, of course, Johanna, alongside with the presentation. Thank you for that. What presentation tool did you use for the slide deck?
I use Keynote, which is by far my favorite presentation option. I also use Google Slides sometimes, but I really like, so my new computer has that little thing at the top, the little bar that like is no one knows what to do with it. But Keynote, you can see all of your slides, and I love that. And so when I use Google Slides, I can't see them. So that's what I use as Keynote.
Nice. Question about new small business relief bill that just got passed by Congress. Any thoughts there in terms of how it may impact in terms of design business or freelancers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a question on everyone's mind, right? Like what's going to happen with freelance? Like I have no idea how this is going to affect my business. I think it's possible that it won't affect it a ton. Like I don't work with a lot of event-based groups, you know, and it's possible that everyone's going to go remote and it's not going to be that different. It's possible that it'll have a huge effect. I'm not really sure. And I think I'm really kind of paying attention to it and curious to see what will happen. But to be honest, I have no idea. It's like I said, it seems like such a moving target right now.
Yeah, that's very true.
Hi,
go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, just jump in real quick. I've looked at the legislation. I haven't seen what they just passed, and there may be some changes. But one of the aspects is a small business loans, liquidity loans, which I think a lot of small businesses may need. If you qualify, it can be like a 3% loan, which is almost worth taking because that's almost like free money in the environment. So I urge everybody to, you know, look into what the provisions of that are and to take advantage of them, because I think that we're going to see a tremendous economic slowdown, especially for freelancers, independent contractors, small business owners. I mean, they're already hit. I know people that have just, you know, they just don't have work now. You know, if they had any sort of group kind of businesses, you know, it involved grouped outreach, like selling in small market fairs or whatever. Those things are just closed down. They you know, they have no income. And so, you know, I know we'll all be getting a $1,200 check, which is kind of, I mean, it's not nothing, but it's practically nothing. But I think those small business loans should be taken very seriously by everybody in the sector as a form of relief. So I just suggest that. Also, by the way, with regard to your answer about the billing slow-mowing, because we're all going to see that now too, your point is very well taken. You should have a 2-week or at most 1-month billing cycle and keep your billing up. I've seen so many small businesses, they just don't like sitting down, doing, you know, keeping their time, their expenses, all that kind of stuff. So they leave it to the end, then it's a huge bill, and then that's an issue. But if you do it like every 2 weeks or every month, then if nothing else, you'll know early on if the client's going to be a slow-mo or even a no pay, and you can deal with it accordingly. You can get a lawyer. There's also a small claims court, but it's tough for a freelancer to, the best thing is to recognize if they are going to be a deadbeat and cut them.
Right.
Sorry to sound harsh.
That's true.
Thanks a lot.
Go frequent, real often. Yeah, and Ann, this leads into your next question. You mentioned about small business administration loans. So that's good. The next question then would be for Johanna is whether or not you have reached out to SBA for advice or assistance.
No, not yet. I have not. It might be something I'll do at some point, but I have not yet.
Great. Another question from Swato. For freelancing, is this including building the actual website or is this only design? Is there a freelancing opportunity for simply designing and not building? So I guess for coding, I guess to the actual code.
Sure, absolutely.
What
Yeah,
do you
usually
use to build the actual website, and what would you recommend?
Yeah. So yeah, I am like I work with developers, right? So I mean, I do some coding as well, but I often will do the design, work with a developer, and it's also it's helpful if you know some developers already, right? So you can pitch yourself as a team. I use Sketch and also Figma. I use them both, and I've kind of been actually right now I'm doing one project in Figma and one in Sketch, and sort of comparing them, and they're both great for different things. The reason I particularly am doing Figma on this one project is the developer I'm working with doesn't have her own account for any of the programs anymore. So Figma was the one that worked the best for her. So I was like, oh, perfect. Like that works really well. So I think being flexible, like often if you're working with other people, the tool that works the best for them is often just the tool to use. So that's mainly what I've been using.
That's great. Those are the questions that I've received. I just want to give maybe other folks here maybe just a couple minutes there in case if I missed any, and or if you have any additional questions for Johanna.
I'd just like to say thanks, John. You did an awesome overview, really.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad to hear it.
Oh, got one question. All right, fast and furious. If people are coming through, everyone thanking you, Johanna. So I don't know if you can't see the chat window because I know you had the presentation up. We had a question from like, did you niche down your business for a specific audience, and how did you go about finding a niche for your business?
That's a great question. So how do you sort of decide the specific thing that you want to focus on? I know when I first got started in design, the advice that I got was you have to come up with a specialty. And I just didn't know what my specialty was, right? I was like, I don't know, I haven't done this yet, right? And over the years, I have sort of figured out what I like doing. Like now I know I really like visual and UX design combined. I really like working on websites, but that is not something that I knew right away. Like it took a lot of time to get there. And to be honest, I work on other projects too. Like I taught a class on print design in American. Like I'm pretty good at print, you know, but I sort of, in the way that I present myself, I decided that those were the things that I wanted to focus on because that's my favorite kind of work to do. So that's sort of how I did that. But honestly, it took a long time. It wasn't something, I think some people are really good at figuring that out right away. And I was not. It took me years to figure out that that's kind of the focus that I wanted to have. And I think it's very possible that in another 5 years, I might have a different focus.
That's great. And I have one last question for you, Johanna, and everyone's chiming in here in the chat window, thanking you for the wonderful presentation. Last question, the takeaway for the group. What's your take on ROI when you're thinking about building your business, right? You've given us a tremendous outline of best practices, going about it, and measuring sort of success. What would you quantify as a good success, knowing that this is a business? What would be a good return on your investment for your time? And what would you sort of give an advice for folks who are kind of jumping into this for the first time or are sort of fine-tuning their approach?
So the question is sort of like, how am I figuring out, are you talking about particularly financially? Like how am I figuring out like what the right amount of money is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't have to be amount, it could be percentage or sort of return that you're looking for. It could be monetary or it could be something else. But in this case for business, maybe monetary from a percentage standpoint.
Yeah. So I think that, like I said, for me, like for my first year, my goal was I want to like cover my expenses, right? That was pretty much like, if I can do that, that'll be great. And I think longer term, I will hopefully be able to make higher and higher, estimates for myself or plans. But that honestly was my first one, in part because I really didn't know how to go about doing that. So I was like, well, I'll just do this for now. In terms of like my big picture goals, like what I would like to do, right? I think one question is like, would I want to run my own agency? I don't know, maybe, right? I really like working with other people and I really like managing other people. So that occurs to me as something that I might want to do. I think I'm sort of in this interesting part where I don't have a lot of really clearly defined goals. Like I don't have a 5-year plan. I have some general ideas of things I want to learn more about. And then I hope that I will, in the process of doing this, get to try different things and get a better sense of what I want to do moving forward. That probably is not the very best way to do it. That's just sort of the way I've been doing it because I don't really know. I don't have like a business plan in that sense, right? Like I'm not super knowledgeable about business things. So this, like as a UX designer, I was like, this seems like something I know how to do, right? So that's kind of how I've been approaching it. I think that probably, hopefully in the coming months, I will be trying to get more organized about some of the particulars, but that's sort of where I've been at so far.
That's cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's great to jump in. I know that you mentioned about, testing the waters, if you will, in some ways is your MVP. So yeah, that's great. And for folks that are doing this, I mean, obviously from a profit margin standpoint, it's also something you guys want to consider. Obviously there are expenses and budgets and costs the ROI from your margin perspective is going to be pretty important. So think of your time more than just your time, but think of it as a business standpoint in terms of your ROI for your profit margin overall for the business. So thank you, Johanna. Jim Lane, I know you have something that you wanted to add as we have the folks here.
Yeah, so Johanna, great talk. I was tweeting up a storm while you were talking. Everybody, we've been doing these a long time, and while we've had a few virtual guests, we've never done one of these, over Zoom or WebEx before. So this is our first time doing this. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And we'll be doing some more of these. I have a funny feeling. So, but we appreciate you guys joining us this evening. Jody, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, well, just to echo what Jim said, thank you all for coming out and being our first virtual NoVA UX. We really appreciate it. And Johanna, thank you so much for sharing everything. There was some really great information in your talk. And like we said, we'll get the talk archived up on YouTube. I know Zoom recordings are taking a little longer than usual, just because Zoom is a little taxed at this moment. And as soon as you've got the slides up, we can also share those out. So we'll announce our April meetup as well shortly. And thank you guys again. Please stay safe and keep your distance. So thank you for joining us virtually. And again, let's give a big sort of virtual round of applause to Johanna for sharing her slides with us tonight.
Yay!
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night. And hopefully this was refreshing and didn't feel like you were heading into another work meeting at your desk. Awesome. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.